kuondoa sipokuwa Mwenyezi Mungu. Sema Mwenyezi Mungu asifiwe, yeye ni Mwenyezi Mungu, na wote ni watumishi wake, na wote wanaishi kwa mapenzi yake, na wote wanaishi kwa mapenzi yake.
Thank you, Janet. So now I'd like to introduce our presenter today. We're so thrilled to have Jenna Nicholas, and she's going to be speaking on racial and climate justice, regenerative agriculture, divestment, and spirituality. So for those of you who are not familiar with Jenna, she's the co-founder and CEO of Impact Experience, which is focused on addressing structural racism and dismantling prejudice by confronting and engaging with historical and ongoing realities of inequality and bias. Jenna is also the vice president of One Planet BC, where she invests in early stage businesses in transformative industries, such as education, technology, marketplaces, media, and the future of mobility. She is also head of corporate development at One Planet Group, where she helps to lead the merger acquisition work. She is a graduate of Stanford University with an international relations honors degree. And at the same time, she also read international development at Oxford University. She's also a graduate of the Graduate School of Business at Stanford with a business MBA degree and a PD Soros Fellow for New Americans, as well as a 2017 Stanford Social Innovation Fellow, an Echoing Green Fellow, and Forbes 30 Under 30 for Social Entrepreneurship, and a Summit Fellow. She is an active member of the Baha'i Faith as well, and we're so honored to have you here today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you and all of the deep wisdom that exists within the group. So I'm going to share some remarks and then would love to open up for Q&A and discussion from all of your thoughts and perspectives. And my goal really today is to share from my experience of what is seen and unseen as it relates to agriculture and its impact on our world. And I'll be sharing with this perspective as a Baha'i, but also as an investor and entrepreneur. And my goal today is to touch on several topics, including firstly, the role of data in addressing the challenges of extractive agriculture. Secondly, the role of farmers themselves in the design of potential solutions. Thirdly, the role of scientific innovation and faith as it relates to technological development and application. And finally, and fourthly, a call to action. So how can we all come together to create more inclusive innovations as it relates to agriculture and farming? From a young age, the concept of our interconnectedness with the world and the environment has deeply resonated with me. I actually remember going to a seminar that Arthur Dahl had organized at Oxford when I was probably about 13 or 14 years old, and I managed to sneak my way in to be the minute taker was my claim to fame at that time. And I remember this quotation that was shared during that session, and I've heard many times since. It was from Shoghi Effendi, and it says, "We cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions." That quotation and that concept has been an idea and mechanism that has run throughout much of my professional work since. So all of the work I've engaged in has been in this field of social impact investing. So I started my career working with the Calvert Funds, which is one of the pioneers in the field of social responsible investing into funds and companies across the impact spectrum, but with a particular focus in the environmental space. And this work led to helping to build a coalition of foundations that were divesting from fossil fuels and investing in new economy solutions. We ended up building a coalition of about 170 foundations, representing about $50 billion in assets, and part of a broader movement of universities, faith-based groups, and individuals representing over $4 trillion, who are going through this similar process of divesting from fossil fuels and investing in new economy solutions. We use tools as part of this process, like the Carbon Tracker 200, that lists the top 200 worst fossil fuel companies, such as Exxon, Shell, Chevron. And these are powerful tools for these foundation endowments and others to be able to go to their financial advisors and consultants to have clarity around what were companies that could be divested from and what could be actively invested in. However, at the time, one of the big discussions was, why don't we have similar tools for looking at large-scale extractive agriculture companies, which, as we know, are some of the biggest emitters of carbon? And so this really animated this question for me of, like, what would it look like and how do we think about the data to be able to aggregate, to be able to build financial tools, to be able to be divesting from large-scale extractive agriculture and investing in many of the solutions that many of you work on of smallholder farmers, regenerative agriculture. And so this really became an animating theme behind this sort of first theme that I'd love to explore today, which is the role of data. But one of the challenges in the field of social responsible investing is the importance of clear and transparent data, particularly thinking about, in that data collection process, who is involved in that process. And this question of who is involved, coming up was a big part of the inspiration for us for co-founding Impact Experience. And it comes back to a line from the Baha'i writings that is particularly talking about the divide between the rich and the poor. It says, a fresh look at the problem is required, entailing consultation with experts from a wide spectrum of disciplines, devoid of economic and ideological polemics, and involving the people directly affected in the decisions that must urgently be made. So this question of how do we engage people who are directly involved in the decisions, farmers being obviously a core component of this, in the decision-making processes, was an animating influence behind the founding of our work at Impact Experience. And at Impact Experience, we're focused on building bridges between investors, entrepreneurs, and communities that have been overlooked and underestimated. One of the initiatives that we're currently working on related to our themes today and supported by the Hewlett Foundation is in collaboration with two organizations, Adesina Social Capital and ETC Group. Adesina Social Capital is a financial institution that's focused on building investment products at the alignment of racial, climate, and gender justice. ETC Group, that some of you may know, has done incredible work over the years supporting and elevating peasant and indigenous farmers. This collaboration is focused on building data sets in order to have the tools to divest from extractive agriculture companies and to invest in regenerative agriculture companies. We will then be engaging a group of investors and foundations around these tools. As mentioned, a big inspiration for us in the founding of Impact Experience was recognizing the importance of engaging people working on the front lines around core decisions such as resource and asset allocation. This very much resonates with the principle in the Baha'i faith around engaging farmers. And this leads me to my second point around the importance of engaging farmers in decision-making processes. Abdu'l-Baha said, the question of economics must commence with the farmer and then be extended to the other classes, inasmuch as the number of farmers is greater than all other classes, many, many times greater. Therefore, it is fitting that the economic problem be solved with the farmer, for the farmer is the first active agent in the body politic. This concept was a big part of the inspiration for some of the work that we've engaged in Impact Experience around agriculture in rural Georgia. This work is in collaboration with the Saffron Foundation and was focused on the intersection of racial and climate justice. We engaged people from the Gullah Geechee community to ground in the historical context of the Atlantic slave trade and ways in which that plays out to today in terms of structural racism. In particular, looking at the historical roots of plantations and shifting the narrative to include a new generation in this discourse, and the reclaiming of land in ways that serve humanity rather than extract from it. We collaborated with a group called Saffron, which is the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network. We're really focused on creating an enabling environment for a Black agrarian revival in the rural South. As many of us know, when we look at the allocation of funds to farmers, both within the US and internationally, that there is not an equal allocation to farmers. And so the importance of groups like Saffron to be elevating the work of Black farmers in this case as being a really important aspect of this. But of course, there are other groups that are doing incredible work around Indigenous farmers, Latinx farmers, and others. Another initiative that we have been involved in at Impact Experience is in Southern West Virginia. It's a community that has been very reliant upon the fossil fuel industry. And as part of our work there, it's involved repurposing former coal mining land into sustainable agriculture initiatives. In addition to my work with Impact Experience, as was mentioned earlier, I also work with a company called One Planet Group. One Planet Group is a Baha'i-inspired company that does three main things, which is to incubate, operate, and invest in businesses. I help to lead the investments, and we have a focus on investing into women and people of color run businesses and ensuring that at least 60% of our portfolio is into women and people of color run businesses. When we look at the investments that are made annually, of the $69 trillion that are invested, less than 2% is invested into women and people of color run businesses. One of the companies that we invested in related to our conversation today is run by two Black women. It's actually a company that has raised the most amount of funds led by Black women, and it's called Grow Intelligence. And they're doing amazing work in using analytics, indices, and decision models to help to predict, based on climate change and other changes in the environment, what are the most effective crops to be cultivated in different communities. And these are tools that can be used by farmers, by companies, by funders. And this leads me to my third point about the power of scientific innovation grounded by ethics and morality. One of the core concepts in the Baha'i faith, as we know, is the power of the balance of science and religion. The Baha'i writings say, religion and science are the two wings upon which man's intelligence can soar into the heights with which the human soul can progress. It is not possible to fly with one wing alone. So there is an incredibly positive side of data and technology where it can be used, like the example I just described with Grow Intelligence. There are other companies like Climate AI that help farmers to predict based on climate change what are the best crops that can be produced. On the flip side, data and technology can also be used for harm. For example, there is an increasing concern around the mechanization of farms and the role of robots and ways in which this can both create greater efficiency, but also the challenges in terms of the loss of jobs and the workforce. This mechanization of workers has been taking place for generations, and the challenge of how are we recognizing the inherent nobility of people, and in this case, farmers, in that process. There is a book actually written by a Baha'i, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, called The New Jim Code. And it talks about the role of biases that have been integrated into AI, and particularly as it relates to racial justice. And this has been a really important aspect in much of our work at Impact Experience, and looking at the role of how algorithms, when biases are integrated, the impact that it has, of course, on agriculture, on healthcare, and on investments. We also see this question coming up as it relates to farm data. So farm data is one of the largest data sets that we have around the world. And as many of us know, the energy use at data centers is one of the biggest challenges as it relates to CO2 emissions. So the importance of, as we're thinking about this data collection process, how are we also thinking about renewable energy sources that can help to fuel these data centers? Another great book on this topic is called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And this question of how are we holding the pros and cons of data? There's a line from this book that says, data colonialism combines the predatory extractive practices of historical colonialism with the abstract quantification methods of computing. So we see this when we look at some of the monopolies that exist within the agriculture industry, with Bayer purchasing Monsanto. The challenges also more broadly within technology companies of Amazon and the purchase of Whole Foods. And so how do we think about coming back to this data and transparency? How are we holding companies accountable, in this broader ecosystem? On the flip side, it's powerful for us to remember that 70% of food sources come from smallholder farmers and 30% from large companies. So when we're thinking about the engagement with smallholder farmers, remembering the years of wisdom and indigenous wisdom that exists amongst these farmers and the medicines of the forest, and particularly food as a source of medicine, and coming back to that and building off the insights that exist within so many of these communities. Some of the other areas that become important as we're thinking about technological innovation and development and grounding that with ethics is, of course, the questions of GMOs, contamination and fertilizers and gene editing. Of course, there's a power in the development of technology and feeding the world, but how do we think about the potential unintended consequences that come about in the development of this technology without having clear ethical frameworks to guide that development? Another area of consideration around this is around carbon sequestration. It's so powerful to see, so many companies, Microsoft, Apple, Google, are making these commitments to transition towards net zero and investing into initiatives and farms and forests to be able to plant trees. I know a number of you have been involved in great initiatives around this, but the importance of the transparency and accountability around that to ensure that it isn't just 2 years later that those trees are cut down, that we're seeing, I live in California with the wildfires that are taking place, and many of the areas that had been allocated for this carbon sequestration that are being now damaged by fires. How do we think about these feedback loops and the possibility of ensuring that we are holding companies accountable as they're making these commitments? We also, one of the other areas for us to consider is with this over-reliance upon technology, that if something goes wrong or if technology is hacked, the impact that could have on some of these systems. So this leads me to my fourth and final point, which is a call to action around how can we come together to create more inclusive innovations. There's a passage from the Baha'i writings that talks about humanity's transition from adolescence to adulthood. It says, humanity is now experiencing the commotions invariably associated with the most turbulent stage of its evolution, the stage of adolescence, when the impetuosity of youth and its vehemence reach their climax and must gradually be superseded by the calmness, the wisdom, and the maturity that characterize the stage of manhood. So as we are thinking about this transition from adolescence to adulthood, how are we bringing that calmness, that wisdom, and that maturity that exists within so many indigenous communities to bear as it relates to navigating so many of these questions that we're talking about today? This also links back to the Baha'i concept around the importance of moderation in all things. And how do we ensure that we are integrating this conception of moderation as we are thinking about technological advancement, and again, recognizing the inherent dignity and humanity of all people? People were talking earlier about the recent IPCC report, and we know that, and we have known for generations, but there is the urgency around climate change is becoming clearer and clearer to a broader swath of humanity. We see this now with Hurricane Ida hitting the Gulf Stream, the importance of having an intentionality as it relates to thinking about questions around climate migration, and this necessity of a frame around unity so that we can build off the forces of integration rather than the forces of disintegration. This links to a passage from the Universal House of Justice where it says, "The welfare of any segment of humanity is inextricably bound up with the welfare of the whole. Humanity's collective life suffers when any one group thinks of its own well-being in isolation from that of its neighbors, or pursues economic gain without regard for how the natural environment, which provides sustenance for all, is affected. A stubborn obstruction then stands in the way of meaningful social progress. Time and again, avarice and self-interest prevail at the expense of the common good. Unconscionable quantities of wealth are being amassed, and the instability this creates is made worse by how income and opportunity are spread so unevenly, both between nations and within nations. But it need not be so. However much such conditions are the outcome of history, they do not have to define the future. And even if current approaches to economic life satisfied humanity's stage of adolescence, they are certainly inadequate for its dawning age of maturity. There is no justification for continuing to perpetuate structures, rules, and systems that manifestly fail to serve the interests of all peoples. There is an inherent moral dimension to the generation, distribution, and utilization of wealth and resources. So unless we take these concepts into consideration, unless we are thinking about our interconnectedness as part of the design of these solutions, then we're greatly limited as a result. The Universal House of Justice continues, or in another letter says, that materialistic ideals have, in the light of experience, failed to satisfy the needs of mankind, calls for an honest acknowledgement that a fresh effort must now be made to find the solutions to the agonizing problems of the planet. When we look at the word regenerative, it comes from the word in Latin regenerare, which means to bring forth again, or to produce or bring into existence. When we think about the generations of deep wisdom that exist within Indigenous communities, this power of coming back to that wisdom and insights that exists is our call and our opportunity today. I'm going to close my remarks here and would love to open up to any reflections, questions, thoughts that you all have, and excited to dive deeper with you. Arthur, please.
Thank you, Jenna. You're brilliant, and it's wonderful to see how you're integrating everything from big business to the indigenous people in one complex systems approach. And of course, the Baha'i faith is a systems approach religion. I mean, the integration is already there in our spiritual principles. But I had two quite specific technical questions, since you're looking at that interface. One is that everybody talks about electric cars. I haven't seen anybody talking about renewable energy for farm implements and farm vehicles and so on. And it seems to me there must be great potential to take the technology. How can we help small scale farmers who, can going beyond the farm animal plowing the field, or whatever, to have something that is sustainable, renewable, and much doesn't require the constant purchase of fuel to allow them to be more productive at their level. So do you know of people who are now working at that area of appropriate technology, renewable technology for the rural sector? One other dimension that experience I had in India a few years ago, we were looking at development in a rural area, and there was the head of one little village of 2,000 people, 4 hours travel from Bangalore in a semi-desert area, was doing interesting things in terms of how do you plant trees, some of which will resist drought because they have deep roots but grow slowly. And then you plant acacias, which can provide fodder for the animals. If there's a drought, you cut them all at ground level to save the water for the other trees. So actually adapting the farming. But they also said there's the local herders, in small scale, low caste herders, illiterate, around their village, migrated 500 kilometers, taking their flocks, looking for, for a place for them to feed. And they said these people all have cell phones, because even though they're illiterate, they can call ahead to find the farmer who will take their animal for their life. And with our students, we developed a program for them in televeterinary medicine. If during migration a sheep falls sick, you can call a vet and get advice of what to do to treat that. But you had to do it in a way that with illiterate people who can't even read, couldn't use SMSs. But so there's potential in Africa. Many people have smartphones, and it's and is something being done to use that technology to take all these new things into rural areas and helping them to get access to the things that they could never access before, but also in data collection. People with phones could provide data, directly from the rural areas to support the kind of things that you're doing. So what can be done to use the smartphone technology to also respond to the interests that you've expressed and that you're working on. So 2 technical questions, if you have any reflections. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for both of those questions. And I can share some thoughts and others may also have perspectives on this. I'll take the second one first. So actually, I have seen a few companies, and actually there's one company that we've been looking at. They were actually supported by Y Combinator, the amazing entrepreneur, Rohit Garg. I can post something about them in the chat. The company's called Harvesting. They're focused in India, but we're also looking eventually to expand to other areas too. And they use exactly this. They're built. The Rohit's grandfather was a farmer, and he's sort of came to California and worked at Microsoft, was successful in Silicon Valley, and has kind of gone back to India to really sort of use both SMS and texting, but also Twitter and social media, and the ability to actually be able to work with many of these farmers who, to your point, are so plugged into these technologies and opportunities, that very basic being able to share, how are crops doing in this community? What's happening over here? Where is there a need from buyers? Where are the sellers? And to kind of connect those dots in a really seamless way. And what I really appreciated about learning about their work was that they are building the company and the technology hand in hand with the farmers. So, I think one of the challenges that with some of the companies that are doing this work is that it's the focus and like their end user are the consumers rather than the farmers. Whereas the way that they have gone about building this company has very much been, what are the pain points that the farmers have, and how do we build from that place outwards. So that would be one example, which I'm sure there's many others that others can also touch on. In terms of the first question around electric vehicles, I was just going to actually post another link in the chat. And this is more of just an article about this topic, sort of more broadly. But I have seen an increasing number of companies over the last, particularly 18 months, it seems, that are looking at exactly this question of, how do we use this technology that is being applied in so many other dimensions? How do we use it within, also within farming? And I think it's super exciting to see that. I think that it's come back also to this question on the other side of many of the vehicles that are being explored to be developed. They're both electric and they're autonomous. And so this question around, okay, so what is the role of the farmers, moving forward? If we get to this point where we have these, incredible electric autonomous vehicles on farms, how do we think about, what is the role of farmers within that? So this balance, again, I think of how exciting it is that we have these more renewable sources that can help to support the development on these farms, but how are we thinking about the kind of human element as part of that? So those are a couple of thoughts on those questions, but others may have other thoughts on that as well.
Right.
I know we also have many other hands up as well, so yeah, go ahead, Dawn.
Perhaps Hugh is next, and he may have some thoughts on this as well.
Well, on the question of technology that starts with smallholder farmers, because as you point out, Jenna, it generally starts with the end user or consumer, and they try and smush it down and make it fit and think they're doing something wonderful, which generally is not the case. Our farmers, as we began to grow cotton, kept saying, isn't there something you can do to help us to harvest the cotton a little more easily? And I was in the fields with them, and when you try and pull the cotton off, your fingers get pricked, and it's miserable. But there's nothing in between smallholder farmers and a large-scale industrial cotton farm with combines. So we found a little company in Brazil that was basically repurposing a leaf blower, but to make it go in the other direction and suck the cotton balls off the end of the plant. So I challenged them to make a solar version, and I've invested in that through our organization. And so we will be field testing what we believe, others may have done this already, but we believe it will be the first solar operated backpack cotton harvester designed exclusively for small scale farmers.
Wow.
So there's so much potential, but it generally comes from more developing countries because they are closer to the smallholder farmers. They can ask the question, what do you need? And then come up with innovative solutions. But the application of technology is fascinating, because in order to create the casing for this thing, it has to be digitally printed, 3D printing. So again, an interesting crossover between something so high tech and something very simple and smallholder appropriate. We're also working on some of you may know, a new data app for smallholder farmers, which will be launching as in the next couple of weeks as a spin-off for-profit company, because it was becoming too large an enterprise to manage within the framework of a non-profit. So smallholder data services will be soon announced, let's say.
Wonderful. I look forward to hearing more.
Great. So now, Marvius, you had a question, or?
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. I have some few questions. Thank you very much, Jenna, for your presentation. I've enjoyed it. The first question is going on that ratio factor that you explained. Actually, I had not realized that ratio factor can be also be translated into agriculture. But the way you brought it up, somehow it has opened up. But I don't know. What plans you have, for instance, if you have said you are trying to empower balance in terms of gender, in terms of color, what are some of ways? Because empowerment is different from maintaining what you've created. For instance, after empowering those people of color, what sustainable plans do you have for them? Do you have a clear plan for them? For instance, some people, such that they gain that confidence that they can bring out something in it, because some of them, even they have not achieved much education. And in the end, they need that balance. You need a balance where they are missing that some technical part. What plans do you have for that? Then in terms of the app, I've realized data sharing is very, very good. But in Africa to share, I'm from Uganda right now, I'm in Uganda. But my fellow youth and other people, and many farmers, local farmers, they don't have smartphones, that's a fact. The only easiest access of information is through radio, and there are few are having that. So I don't have, if you are planning to bring that up, I don't know how you're going to make sure that even African communities can gain from that. Then another question, already we have some existing data, indigenous knowledge. Do you have a room for innovation together with tapping and collection of that already existing data, so that people don't duplicate in the collection of data, they begin from what is already on ground? I don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those questions and reflections. So I can share a few thoughts that come to mind around that, and then we'd love to see if you have other thoughts or other people have reflections too. So on the first point, I think it's a really interesting one, and even the use of the language that we have around empowering and where opportunities lie. One of our partnerships with Impact Experience is on the research side with Stanford, and this is less just related to agriculture, but it's more around kind of how do we unlock more capital into women and people of color run businesses and funds, and how do we acknowledge and recognize the biases that exist within investing and asset allocation. And one of the things that we found from this research was that actually we were particularly looking at Black and white fund managers, and we kind of kept everything constant, but the only thing that changed between them was their race. So they had the same education, the same professional background, and we found that the better performing the Black fund managers were, the more bias that existed. So this was like literally people were leaving money on the table through because their biases were getting in the way of where their assets were invested. And I use this as an example because I think that so often the framing can be like, oh, how do we help people that need to be helped? Whereas actually in many cases, people may be performing incredibly well, and it's not about how do we help them? It's more, how do we unlock the barriers that have got in the way that have prevented them from being able to fully flourish? And I remember hearing, so Layli Miller, who started the Tahirih Justice Center, shared this really powerful reflection. Many of you have probably heard the line, don't just give a man a fish, teach him how to fish. And she said, I don't think it should be just teach someone how to fish. It's like a lot of people actually know how to fish. It's reducing the barriers that have got in the way from them being able to fish. And I think it applies so much to this conversation today that it isn't just about how are we empowering people, but actually how are we reducing the barriers that have got in the way of that true flourishing to take place. And so I think that applies directly to the conversations that we're having today about agriculture and farmers. That so much of this wisdom exists within agriculture and farming communities, but so many barriers have got in the way from the true flourishing of that wisdom. So that's one reflection. In terms of the expansion to of this app from, and in this case, this is not an app that this is a company in India. I know that the way that they've gone about at least their growth within India has very much been partnering with local communities, and I think for the exploration and growth of any companies like that, the importance of having local partners that have that deep wisdom and understanding of the context in which they're operating within as part of that growth and development, so that again it doesn't become an outside-in approach and the understanding like, oh, because this works in India, of course it's going to work in Africa. The importance of being able to recognize what is the local context and what will be resonant within particular communities and building from that place outward. So those are a few reflections, and again, thank you for those questions.
Thank you. Next we have, it's a phone number, so I don't see a name. It's 16134.
Yeah, hi, my name is Amber, and I'm calling in from Manitoulin Island. And I wanted to say thank you so much for this really exciting presentation. And I wanted to mention, sort of in response to the question about electric tractors, I'm a part of the National Farmers Union that's here in Canada. And one of the resolutions that we moved forward last year was about advocating for more electric tractors, both like making them more accessible and on the innovation side. So I think that's pretty exciting. And I guess maybe a question for you, Jenna, is how I'm 27, who have a background in biology, but I just continue to return to the farm and return to the land because that's where I feel like my soul work is. What are some directions or suggestions you have? I think I might want to listen to this again and hear everything that you've said because it's all quite exciting. But any suggestions for a young person like me? Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, and thank you for your work. It sounds very important and inspiring. I think that there was so much in what you said, and I'm happy to also connect further offline. There was so much in what you said about coming back and returning to the soul's work, and I think in so many ways trusting that and continuing to come back to that. And I'm sure there are many in this group that can share thoughts and reflections of how that's played out in their lives. I'm only just a little bit older than you, so I don't have years of experience, but based on just some of the advice that I've received sort of over the years is the power of certainly that of coming back to what is that North Star and compass, and not enabling. I think it can be so easy to become so distracted by all the pools of the world to go in so many different directions, and I think the power of being able to share the insights and wisdom that you have from engaging in the land and to build off from that space. I do think and one of the things that has been a core element as part of our work with Impact Experience has been this how are we building bridges between people who are coming from many different backgrounds and contexts. And I think one of the challenges that exists so often, and we see this, I know there's been a lot of discourse about the UN World Food Summit and how are people being engaged in that discourse that are coming from a broad range of perspectives. But I think as building the opportunities to be able to both share and learn within broader demographics of people, so the ability to continue to expand those pools of engagement, because I think it can be very easy to stay in one silo of here are the people that we work with, here's my community, and which is powerful to build from that foundation, but then also being able to share that with a broader community of people, and to be able to kind of learn and reciprocate that learning together. So those are a few reflections, but we'll be very happy to kind of dive deeper kind of offline as well.
Great. Holiance?
Thanks a lot. That was a good presentation. Just to comment a little on the different innovative technology. A while ago, I got an opportunity to interact with farmers here in Kenya who are now subscribing to weather indexed insurance for their maize crops. And yeah, when I was helping a graduate student from the US set up some research study. She was interested in finding out if there are gender differences in terms of adoption. So I never had not known about it. So we had to walk to the village, and it's quite amazing to see how the farmers who have already got the hang of it, and every season subscribing for this insurance, are happy with what they get, because this is in a county where it's quite dry, and oftentimes the rainfall fails. And the way it has been done is so good that it's because it's based on satellite imagery. So what happens is that when the rainfall fails at a certain point during the growing season, to a certain level that would make the crops fail, the farmers just get the payment direct on their M-Pesa. M-Pesa is a mobile money wallet that we use here. So there are no paperwork that they fill, because this also use your spatial technology. So you buy a card, and with the card has a voucher. So when you send the card to a USSD code, but while at your farm, so it captures your geographic location. So when the rainfall fails, you don't have to call anyone or fill any papers, the usual things which happens with insurance. So farmers are really loving it. The company is still a small startup. It has different challenges, but still continuing on working to improve it. I had a discussion with one of the people there. They're saying they also want to put it together with another technology. They're also trying to lump it together with improved seeds, so farmers don't just plant anything, but they get improved seeds from different agro dealers. So they're looking away at bulking this together. So they are hopeful.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great example of a really powerful technology. I'm sure there's applicability in many other areas as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you. Next is Aporia.
Hi, I was interested to know that if you have any agriculture technology or app under development, or have developed before for your projects, and I'd like to know about that.
Yeah, so we ourselves haven't. I am more on the sort of investor side, so investing into technologies that both within agriculture and more broadly, and then that's on the One Planet side, and then impact experience. We more kind of bring together different investors and companies, many of whom are working on different technologies. The company that I was mentioning earlier, that is a technology that we've invested in. It's Grower Intelligence. I've just linked to their chat. Provided their link in the chat. So that would definitely be one that I would recommend. Looking at. The other is a company that was started by some friends of mine that do some similar work, Climate AI. So just posted about their work in the chat. But there may be others. It seems like another number of people in the group. I know Hugh was mentioning an app that he's working on. That there may be other people in the group, who are working on apps themselves that could be relevant. So very open if others would like to share as well.
Yes, thank you, Aporia.
Thank you.
So next is Ndeli.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Don, for giving me this opportunity. Jen, I really want to thank you. I've really appreciated your presentation. I'm calling in from Chad. Now, what really impressed me was, well, the whole presentation was very impressive, but what really touched me is your response when you talked about the fact that it is not only sufficient to teach a man to fish, but to remove the barriers. And that really touched me because in most of the discourses that I listen to, I've been fortunate to participate in, this aspect is not brought out, especially in relation to the African farmers. Farmers can be very hardworking, but there are so many barriers. And one of those barriers is the price of the market. I remember when we lived in Kenya some years ago, all the suburbs around Nairobi had coffee plantations. But a few years ago, I went back to Nairobi and drove to those suburbs, and they have all become real estates. They have all been rented out by the families to construct houses to sell to people, because the coffee business is not working, it's not profitable. And the same thing you would find, I remember listening to a presentation on CNN several years ago, whereby a woman in Ghana, which is the second highest producer of cocoa in the world, has never tasted chocolate. And when you go around Africa, you realize that most of these farmers go to the farm 7 days a week, and yet they are not even able to afford the basic medical needs of their families or pay tuition for their children. And you ask yourself why? And you ask yourself whether people should be encouraged to continue farming. But when you look at it, you realize that there are so many barriers, and these barriers are known, but they are not being talked about. You know, I've mentioned one of them, which is the price. Take the price of coffee. If the price of coffee is measured based on the labor and everything that the farmers have to put in, then you realize that prices of coffee around the world becomes high. And so most people are not going to be able to drink as many cups of coffee as they drink a day. And the same thing applies to cocoa and other raw materials that these farmers are laboring day in, day out, you know, to produce. So I was very impressed when you brought up this. But as I said, these are topics, these are the elements that do not appear in public discourses. When they talk of immigration, nobody talks about the fact that if the farmers in Africa, for example, were receiving enough for their labor, for their products, this is going to reduce immigration. These youth are not going to be crossing the Mediterranean and dying because they want to get to Europe, because they have a lot of land to cultivate. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up. And I once more thank you for all your presentation.
Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing, you know, all of that, and just it's been amazing hearing from so many of you about some of your perspectives and thoughts on these topics. And it makes me think, just particularly the example that you shared. I had the opportunity to spend some time with the Heifer Foundation. This was actually in Guatemala, but they also do a fair bit of work, you know, in Kenya and in Tanzania and other parts of Africa, and spending time with some smallholder farmers in Guatemala who were producing coffee. And what made me think of this and what you described was particularly about the role of women. And a lot of the work of the Heifer Foundation has been around gender equity and farmers, and the kind of multiplier effect through investing into women and women in communities as it relates to to farming. And so I just think it's a really important aspect of this whole conversation as well. And just seeing firsthand exactly what you were describing in terms of just the coffee farms and the challenges around pricing, and those that had, more opportunities for mechanization and those that didn't, and what impact that had in terms of, what was possible or what wasn't. So really appreciate, your reflections on that.
Thank you. Next, Neil.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you very, very much for the wonderful presentation that balanced. It was a very good example of how to contribute to the discourse. The topic I'd like to bring out conceptually and also practically is the question of land, how cultural attitudes to land ownership, and when we look at land ownership in different countries, like in Britain, for example, or even Scotland, where I come from, there is data out there online that shows how historically the land has been assigned to basically the aristocracy. So the question I have, Jenna, is, do the organizations you work for, first of all, have comprehensive data on land ownership in the different countries? And secondly, do any of them invest in land in the sense of a farmland trusts to preserve the land for agricultural production and ideally regenerative agricultural production?
Yes, no, thank you for bringing that up. It's such an important topic, and has really actually run throughout much of the work. Almost, I would say, everywhere that we've worked, this question comes up. In Puerto Rico, the challenge of the kind of history of land and land ownership all across. I'm originally from the UK, and exactly the points that you brought up as it relates to the UK. But here in the US, the challenges from a structural racism perspective in terms of who is allocated land, and the role of documentation, and there's a whole movement of people trying to kind of demonstrate ways in which that actually land belonging to certain, particularly African-American families, that was taken over by others, but the power of being able to prove that, and what does that mean, and the role of land trusts, exactly as you say, and community ownership and cooperative models. There are a number of initiatives. I was trying to find actually the link, but I'll just post a link to her LinkedIn. But I'm based in Oakland, California, and there's a woman here, Conda Mason, who's doing some incredible work around land trusts, and particularly communities of color and land trusts. And I think part of it is also just an education around what's possible. I've been amazed in so many groups where people are sharing about land trusts, and others in the group that may not have had a background or context around that, who are just like, if only we had known that, what is possible as a result. So I think this aspect of the educational opportunities as it relates to even how do you structure land trust, where it is applicable, where it may be more challenging, that there's a lot of work that can and needs to be done around that. So really appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, Neil. Joe, you're next.
Land people brought up the idea of land and who has trusteeship over the land. I mean, you could, as is brought up, you could teach someone to fish, but if the lake's been enclosed, the common's been enclosed, where are you going to fish? So I sort of made some notes because I tend to ramble and don't think linearly. I think the whole notion of what we call economy has to be rewritten. It's a fiction that's not very viable, it's not sustainable, and it's not serving people in the grassroots. And so we have to deal with that. We have to deal with the fact that there are legal people, i.e. corporations, that have taken over governance at the expense of people in the grassroots, which includes enclosures, includes cultural piracy, and then patenting the seeds, and then trying to, selling these things to farmers who already had them traditionally, which, ends up farmers killing themselves in India kind of thing. So we have to deal with that. It's good to think systems, but we have to think ecosystems, not just systems. We have to think relationships. We have to start talking about seed patents, liberating the commons. The notion of land as a commodity is a big problem in Western culture. And that's, I don't want to blame the Brits or the North Americans, but there's the people that were the biggest colonials and imperialists are the ones that talk about land as a commodity. And so even the issues like cap and trade, it's commodifying land. And I find that very problematic in terms of going into the future. St. Barbaker talks about the earth as a sentient being. That needs to be considered too, the sacredness of the earth, soil as a living thing. You can add fertilizer, but if you kill the soil, the food, how good is the food? So I mean, these are all these kinds of things that Baha'is, I think, need to be looking at if you look at agriculture in a holistic manner and looking at it in a spiritual manner. You're going to have to like revolutionize the whole way things are done in the economics. Economics, as you know, has the same root word as ecology. Dostoevsky said, beauty will save the world. I say the best way to make beauty is to build a garden, to grow a garden. That's an organic thing. The problem is too many people are talking about investing in land instead of getting their hands dirty. And so, we need to not only give special attention to agriculture, but give dignity and special attention to people who are actually working the land, people that are getting their hands dirty. There's nothing wrong with doing work. And this is a problem in the United States. I don't want to foam in the mouth about it, but it goes back to the founding of our country, where we had a constitution that was probably implemented to preserve the rights of creditors and bankers and business people because the states were giving debt relief to commoners. I'm a commoner here in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm going to say, I'll introduce myself whenever I go, the citizen commoner. I don't have to have a bunch of stuff behind my name to know that I have integrity. And I'm starting to foam, I'm starting to go in a circle, but everything is related. So I have a trouble thinking linearly, but I just threw those things out there because Baha'i need to be thinking about alternatives and not, it's nice to work within the status quo, but at some point the status, it's like the icing looks great, but the cake is moldy.
Thank you. And thank you so much for those reflections and comments. And I actually think that how you started that of not thinking linearly, I actually think is a big part of what is needed and helpful in approaching these topics, right? Because I think so much of the challenges that exist because we have the structures in society have been created in this sort of linear faction that has ultimately created a lot of an extractive economy. And so the power of actually being able to think outside of the box and bring new, I love the frame around not just systems thinking, but ecosystems, of like bringing a fresh perspective to how we are approaching these topics. And of course, and we know, and part of when I started these reflections around like this line from Abdu'l-Baha and the question of economics must commence with the farmer. I'm in so many conversations around economics and investing, and how often do people actually engage with thinking about economics starting with a farmer? I think it's rarer than it can and should be. So I to this point that someone mentioned about contributing towards the discourses, like the ability to both using the voices and opportunities that we have to be able to contribute to how people are having these conversations, but actively engaging farmers and people who are working on the front lines in the decision-making processes, such that we're not continuing to perpetuate these systems of extraction, but we actually have opportunities to build solutions moving forward that truly are taking into consideration those that understand these issues the most. So really appreciate those remarks.
Yes. Now, next is Winnie.
Yes. And I want to echo Joe's contribution. The Baha'i writings are very holistic in their approach to agriculture, to all things. And but I also want to mention, I'm a woman and it's all been men that have been commenting. And here we have a young woman who understands the writings, and that when women enter the industrial and agricultural sciences, it's going to be.
Winnie, I think we just lost you. I think you just went on mute.
Oh my, what did I last say, Jenna?
When women enter the economy and the decision making.
Okay, because we need both of those wings. I have 2 points I'd like to make, because in talking about land ownership, so often people don't make wills. And there was a young man in the 90s in law school who created a program in the United States. Don't know where he is now, but he tried to organize African Americans, indigenous peoples, and Spanish speaking to make wills, because much of the land, the agricultural land, especially where I was understanding in South Carolina, was owned, for instance, by one Black family with many, many, many heirs, and none of the heirs might want to farm except one. And because there was no will, it would go to court, and someone with the money, most likely not African American, would buy up that valuable land. And the one who would have been willing to keep it in the family and farm lost out. So I want to emphasize the importance of wills. And we know that in our faith, that we are to make a will. The other thing I want to mention, way back to the beginning of are there other technologies that are working to improve farming? And long time ago in the 90s, I visited the Land Institute with Wes Jackson in the midmost heart of America in Kansas, Salinas, Kansas. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, Jenna, but at that time, and I just looked it up, it appears they're still doing it. He was very interested in young people like you, and he had 24 interns at that time. And they were documenting the work he was trying to do to find perennial grasses, ones that grew on, and he had some of the virgin prairie, a little bit of it that he'd been able to buy. He was trying to develop those grasses so that we could have perennial grasses into the food system, into the livestock system. The other thing he was doing, and I think they're still doing this, is documenting how if you use sunflower seed oil in one of those huge air-conditioned tractors in Kansas that those farmers really love so much, is it as effective as using a petroleum product? And then with that, he was also testing what is the input-output of draft horses. So there's documentation in that one place, I think, of how regular machinery, I expect it's still going strong in Kansas, a very hot climate, and there's a lot of industrial agriculture, how that, and then using the same tractor with oil seed, which is a product that can be grown over and over again, and the draft horses. So there are places that are hidden away in different parts of the world really working on this. And I just happen to know about Wes because he used to teach at the university in North Carolina when my daughter was going there, where she got 2 degrees in agriculture. So, pardon?
There's something.
I didn't get that.
Now, what? But seriously, I'm hungry. Really hungry.
Thank you so much, Winnie, for those reflections. Really, really appreciate that. And just to echo the first point around the wills, that is something that also actually comes up in our work in many communities. I remember vividly having a conversation with one of our partners in Georgia about exactly this conversation, where it's African-American family, and her grandmother was very close to passing, and she said no one had ever told us about what a will or what a trust or any of these things are. And so the ability to actually, when we think about stewarding and shepherding resources, that the opportunities for access to information around what is possible in terms of that becomes such an important aspect of it. So would really want to echo that. And then similarly, just the work, hearing more about the work of the Land Institute, and there's so many organizations like that it's so important that we kind of elevate the work. I mentioned I'm based here in Oakland. There's an organization here that some of you may know, the Oakland Institute, that has been doing some incredible work as it relates to agriculture around the world. And I just think the importance of, as we're engaging in these conversations and working with people, and particularly I find this in engaging and working with people who are coming at this from a technology perspective, where so much of innovation is like, how are we starting something afresh and new, and which is obviously very important to bring that innovative energy, but the importance of also remembering that there are many organizations and people that have been doing this work for generations, and how are we building off the insights and wisdom that has been developed amongst so many of these people and organizations as we moving forward. And to your point around gender equity, that also elevating the role and work of women in this space is a really important aspect too. So thank you, Winnie, for those comments.
Yes, and now we have Kayanga. Do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I have a comment. Jenna, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. And I think that has really brought us a lot of reasons to think even a little bit deeper about how we are looking at agriculture, and how we can support the farmers to make a better understanding and really impact their production. One of the things I really appreciated is the part of the economic to start with the farmer. I think farmers are some of the people I feel are not really much recognized, despite the fact they take care of everybody's stomach, but we're not very much into appreciating what they do. One of the things I wanted to talk about is because of the economic part of the aspect that a farmer should be the first person who should be the one to earn better and enjoy better what they do as a special service. I think it's one of the things that I really I'm struggling with is I have helped to found a community learning resource center in Kenya, in a very remote rural place in Kenya. And we work with over, I would say our center works with over 300,000 farmers. And there's a lot of, as you say, there's a lot of barriers that are really, really affecting their progress, their growth, their input, the really contribution to the society, in the sense that I come from this very community, and looking at how, I'll mention a few things that I'm looking at as really serious barriers is, for example, the use of chemical fertilizers. We just had our farmers, an annual farmers field day where we had over 1,000 people attending a couple of days ago on Wednesday this week, in fact, and on the 25th. And we had so many chemical fertilizer companies exhibiting on that day. I was in awe. There were so many different, and all of them explaining how their fertilizers have sulfur and potassium and what nitrates and everything. And I feel like our farmers, because of their pre-colonial and after-colonial experiences, they have now downed themselves into using chemicals big time. everybody believes unless they're using chemicals, they can't have any nutrients in their soils, and so they cannot harvest anything. So when you tell them to go into organic farmers, they look at you like, you know what, you can't succeed. In the next 2 years, you're going to be completely dead as a farmer and you will not be able to go anywhere. And I think this has really, really affected the output of the farmers, because they make, okay, fine, they buy the chemical fertilizers, they buy the genetically modified seeds, and the two go hand in hand. But then they harvest whatever they harvest, and the next year they use the same money that they sold from their crop back again to buy all this expensive. These fertilizers are very expensive, these seeds are very expensive, and it's like a vicious cycle that the farmers are not getting out of. So I'm not sure where in the writings that as a Baha'i would be able to help this address this perspective in general output, and also just to make people understand that there's serious impacts that really, really affect the lives of a farmer, and how can we help them to really understand the environmental impacts and also the physical impacts of the body of their health, because they're getting sicknesses, breathing sicknesses. I'm sure there are many other illnesses that are coming with these chemicals, and their water, for example, are being contaminated with all these eutrophications, and just the system is completely, ruined. So that's one of the things I wanted to bring to the table today. Someone could say something about it. And also the other thing is when we're looking at innovation management and I would say production of better systems to be able to help the farmers. How can we help the farmers to really, really turn their peasant farming into entrepreneurship, so that they can understand with the new innovations that they can use their smaller parcels of land to even be able to produce more crops, and better healthy crops, hopefully not with all these chemicals, because everybody believes that the only way you can harvest anything, you have to have a chemical. So how can we use the innovation management and bring it into entrepreneurship and help the farmers to understand that they can be able to do the services, and especially when it comes to in Africa, where I am right now, many of the people working are women. And we want to empower these women. As we said, some of them are illiterate or semi-literate. We want to use gadgets that can be able to make them understand. I was happy to hear about someone talking about the use of Androids and smartphones and all that. Some of them will not be able to use that. We have come to the ground to really, really face the music and help out. How can we do it? And are there any Baha'i agricultural groups out there that we could join, so that, out of this meetings, that we can be able to support each other and share what is out there that people can, incorporate with what we have on the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I can share a few thoughts and reactions to what you shared. I'm sure others will have thoughts as well. Firstly, just the first point you said about kind of how disconnected we are to farming, and the one of the only ways that we connect to it is through the food that we eat. I think that's actually a really important aspect, of this whole conversation, is just how disconnected we are to the actual process through which our food is created, right? And I think, I mentioned the example of Amazon buying Whole Foods, and I think we've seen this, more and more as people kind of getting, particularly in the US, context, but people are getting their deliveries through their apps to their home with this food, that it's become, they're not even going to a grocery store, right? They're not even connected to, actually being able to see the fruit, let alone a farmer's market, let alone a farm, right? And so I think just that point is actually a really important aspect of this whole conversation, because we're so disconnected from where our food and how our food is actually produced. These issues can sometimes become so theoretical, because people aren't actually seeing the day-to-day lives of what farmers are having to go through and what that looks like. And so I think that's an important point more broadly. I think the point about fertilizers, I kept thinking throughout the remarks today about this line from the Baha'i writings of, "Ye walk on my earth, complacent and self-satisfied. heedless that my earth is weary of you and everything within it shunneth you. And that's a really intense statement, right? I mean, I think we've been focused so much in this conversation about, all these amazing, like beautiful things that are possible, but that's a really, the idea that everything within it shunneth you. And I think about that particularly when it comes to like, what are we putting in the ground, and the power of, when we think about these fertilizers and what have you, and the lack of consideration for the medium to long term, maybe even short term, impacts that is having, on the earth, and the complacency that can often come about, as we're engaging in, some of these processes. So I think that's one part, is just that kind of awakening around, what actually is our relationship to the earth, and through the recalibration of our relationship, how does that impact how we're making decisions as to the role of fertilizers, or not. And I also think it connects back to this broader point around kind of the harmony of science and religion, and the role of ethics and morality, as we are navigating scientific and technological advancements and developments, and the importance of having both, right? We're not saying that no scientific development and technological development is important, but rather, as that progress is happening, how are we ensuring that it is buttressed by these ethical and moral frameworks? I know Winnie has a hand up, so I would love to hear Winnie's thoughts, and I'm sure others will have thoughts on this topic as well.
I didn't want to interrupt you, Jenna.
Please.
Well, Kayanga, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly, but your friends might like to tune in to these presentations, because in October, and Dawn can correct me if I've got the date wrong, but the last Sunday in October, Bill Hazen, who is on this call, will be presenting his findings, his data about his own farm in relation to not using chemicals and using chemicals. So that will be very interesting. And Dawn, I thought that maybe it would be good before we hang up to also remind people that they have a few days left if they want to be in the reading groups. And that's on the beautiful announcement that you sent out, what those reading groups are, and then announce what the program would be in September.
Right. So in September, we have a different, trying to think, who is it that we have in September coming up? Can't remember right offhand September, but I know October we do have Bill Hazen, who's going to talk about his transition from conventional to organic farming, which would be exciting. Maybe you want to mention who it is. We're going to talk about soils in September, right?
Not slaughter.
Not slaughter. Yes. Yes. Soil Fort, right? Is the company that he runs.
Earth Fort.
Earth Fort. Sorry. Very good. Yes.
And we do have a reading group about soils.
Right.
So if anyone would, it's a really in-depth book on the life in the soil.
Right.
Kayanga, there is also another startup in Kisumu that's actually being run by a Baha'i friend that works on regenerative soil amendments. So it promotes things like vermicomposting and vermity as alternatives to what we have on our agro dealerships. So I would be glad to link you up. I think you would have really been happy to talk to the farmers, and it promotes the through training of farmers on how to do vermicomposting, and sometimes he also buys the vermicompost and sells to other people who do like horticulture or landscaping in urban areas. So it can be a good contact.
Thank you so much. I think to me, my heart is into the village, into the farming, into just seeing people's livelihood and health really stand out. And so with our organization, with the relief of poverty, advancement of education, and food production and food security, and support of independent living, I am a social worker. So I die to have connections with with agriculturalists because that's where my heart is, but I'm not a trained agriculturalist, even going to the extent of founding an agricultural institution in the community when myself I'm still struggling to learn. So I'm so happy to hear about everything today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to staying in connection and contact with people who are more agriculturalists who can come to the community or send me some information that I can share at our center and have farmers get more access to good information and so they can learn more technology and innovation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So we have one more comment, and then I think we're going to have to finish our time here today. Joan Hernandez?
Yes, yes. I just wanted to comment on Kayanga's, challenge of getting the farmers to try organic methods. I live in Latin America, and Dr. Farzam Arbab, former member of the House of Justice, when he first went to Colombia about 50 years ago, was working a lot with agriculture and farmers. And what he did was just really encourage them that on just one small plot, that they try whatever it was he was teaching them, let's say organic farming, and that they observe it and that they compare. So instead of trying to get them to change everything they were doing, he basically taught them the scientific method, try this out, observe, and then we can talk about it. And then next season, you can see if you want to do it on more of your farm. So I just wanted to mention that as one possible way to approach this challenge, because yeah, getting people to completely change probably isn't very realistic. But if you can get them to even experiment, that might be one small step. So that's it.
Great comment. Thank you. Neil, did you have something else? One last comment?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I am so inspired by today. I'm inspired by this whole group. Once a month, we get these amazing presentations. I just want to introduce something called the World Food Expo. I went to one in Milan in about 3 or 4 years ago. And just the idea of exhibition campuses where the general public can come and see what farming could be like and is like. And I think that this is something, I know that the success of American agriculture is very much due to the land grant colleges that were established in the different states early on. But what I think there's a great future in agricultural areas or even in near urban centers to have theme parks and campuses around agriculture, because the urban dwellers are actually longing to reconnect with the land and farming and that kind of thing. I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
I'm worried about Jenna's time. I need to say thank you to Jenna.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. It was such an honor to be with all of you and to learn and be in community, and looking forward to staying in touch. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much for being with us today. Wonderful.
Best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very wonderful.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Looking forward to stay connected with everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Asante sana Kayanga.